Hey there, I'm Seth Schaefer of Team Just Cuz Robotics. This is Division version 2. Version 1 I will probably reference a few times, but I don't want to go into it too much because I changed almost every single mechanical element of the robot since version 1. That was kind of jankily thrown together based on the general concept of this robot, and as a first attempt it went 2 and 2 at Norwalk in August, and I just brought this robot to Norwalk in September and did exactly the same, but with a completely different list of things that went wrong, and I'm generally a lot happier with this version of the robot, so I'm primarily just going to focus on this one. So Division is a gigantic vertical spinner. The original inspiration was Deep Six, and the idea was basically I hit the other guy so hard that both of us explode, and hopefully my robot can sort of kind of drive at the end, and they can't. In reality, this turned out to be a much more robust weapon platform, even with version 1, than I had anticipated, and it was actually able to keep going after several hits. And in fact, I have, even in all 4 fights of the first version and all 4 fights of the second version, never lost the ability to drive with both drive motors at any point in a fight. So it's really just been a matter of getting stuck in a position that I can't self-right from, or the weapon dying, or both. There's more armor in the front, and it has stiffer armor. So I moved from using almost exclusively 50-52 aluminum to basically everything is 60-61 aluminum other than the weapon in terms of metal components. And then in both versions I used 3D printed parts to attach all of the armor to the base plate and overall frame of the robot. In version 1, the uprights were different. I had a different weapon motor, and it was placed differently, and I used a different belt system, which turned out to be my main flaw with version 1. So previously I used polyurethane rubber belting. You can buy it by the foot from McMaster. I used the 1/8 inch version, which is like 70 cents a foot, so it's super cheap, and you can make dozens of belts out of just a few dollars of the stuff. The problem is, to join it, you have to melt the ends together. Jonathan Schultz of Team Huge has been at Norwalk both times I've been there. He's an awesome guy and is super helpful. He uses the 1/4 inch version of this stuff, I think, or 1/4 inch version, and he said that he joins them by literally setting the ends on fire with a lighter and like really properly getting them melted before binding them together. I tried melting them together with a soldering iron, and every single time in one of my fights, or 3 of my fights, the belt like split in half at the point where I joined it. In one fight, this pulley in version 1, which was 3D printed, actually split across layer lines because I had tried printing it in nylon with really bad settings, and it led to it not adhering to itself very well. But even in testing, even without hitting anything, I had had belts just fly apart at the joint. So for this version, I switched to using a FingerTech timing belts, which are neoprene with Kevlar reinforcement. So they basically don't stretch at all. The downside being that they don't have a rubbery surface that actually grips at all, so it's really a matter of getting perfect belt tension to get the weapon to spin reliably and spin up really quickly. Spinning up was never really an issue mechanically for this version, but having actual torque at the weapon was. With the previous version, I was pretty reliably able to self-right, but with this version, I just can't get enough torque out of the motor, and I can't get enough torque transfer to this pulley reliably to be able to self-right with the weapon the way that I wanted to. I couldn't do it from the back, but not from the front, and you'll see in one of my fights that became a problem. So let's talk about specs. For the base plate, I am using 0.09 inch thick aluminum 6061 CNC routed on a shop bot. I am using the same for the front armor. For the sides and rear, I am using 1/16 inch 6061 aluminum, also CNC routed on a ShopBot CNC router at local makerspace. The uprights are 1/4 inch 6061, which I used a Tormach CNC mill, also at the makerspace, and the forks are made out of the same. So the uprights are 1/4 inch thick, the forks are 1/4 inch, and then at the thickest point they are 3/8 inch tall. The previous version they were 1/4 inch tall, and they split in half in like 3 fights. This version I had one bend 90 degrees against Silent Spring, and it still didn't quite come off, so I was pretty happy about that being much more durable, but I didn't have a single other fork fail. The uprights I actually had bend in one of my fights with version 1 in the rumble at the very end, which was the only time that I actually had any non-mechanical component of version 1 of the robot fail was when Mondo Bizarro basically shredded the entire robot's chassis in the Rumble. So I had these curl up and were trashed, and they were previously made out of 50-52 1/16 inch. So making everything out of 60-61 makes it a lot more rigid, a lot less bendy, a lot less flexible, and just generally tougher because the tensile strength is also improved from 60-61 over 50-52. I am also mounting the armor totally differently. So previously I had tried to use a bent armor piece around the sides and back, which was just dumb. Now I'm using these pieces which are joined 2 screws here. I have 2 screws here that actually bolt straight into the motor itself, and then 1 screw here which isn't shown just because I was lazy. That actually goes into these pieces that hold things on like 4 sides. So they have top, bottom, back, and side armor mount. So I have 1 screw on top, 2 in the back, 1 on the side, and 3 on the bottom. And those pieces were 3D printed. Everything that was 3D printed on this robot except for this pulley were 3D printed in PETG on my home printer, which is a Sidewinder X1. I tried doing nylon prints, I got some out, and then my printer just kind of went kaput. PETG for everything actually held up beautifully. The only time that I had a 3D print fail was when Silent Spring yeeted it across the box. He hit one of these wedges and it just ripped completely off. I'm using 832s threaded everywhere into 3D prints on the bottom, sides, back, and then in the front I have 632s that are threaded in. These are 3/8 inch long. Everywhere else it's 5/16 or 3/8 inch long screws. And then the weapon pulley is 1/2 inch long screws into a nylon 3D printed pulley. Here I've shown a version that you can't really see, but in the versions I had on the robot, the threads went all the way through, which was kind of unnecessary because the screws don't go through that far, but I was just lazy in modeling it that way before. The motor mounts I previously had going all the way back to like halfway over the motor, and I cut them down to save weight. The rear pieces are brand new for this version. The front wedge mounts were completely redesigned. Well, every single part of this was really completely redesigned for this version from the ground up, even though it looks similar. The front armor extends over the side armor now, so that if I take an impact like from a horizontal up here or whatever, instead of this like pushing in where it's not overlapping the side, it has a bit more give there, but it won't be able to go so far that it like hits the wheel or anything. The forks here attach the side armor on the sides, and they attach to the base plate. 3 screws and 2 screws, which are all 632. The uprights have 5 screws, one's hidden underneath this wire guard here. So there's 5 632 screws tapped in there, and then 2 more at the back that hold the rear armor on. Setting that up in the Tormach was a mess, but what I did was I actually laser cut profiles, so it was like a rectangle with this profile cut out of it, and then used that to mount it in the vise in the 2 90-degree orientations I needed to get the Tormach to drill the holes that I could then tap by hand. I had to tap over 125 holes by hand. I strongly recommend anybody who has to do this buy some proper helical taps on Amazon like I did, because I got through over 100 without breaking one, and only broke one because the drill chuck on the cordless drill I was using slipped on it. The tap itself was otherwise going to be perfectly fine for probably another 200 holes. Over here you can see I have a mix of different screw types. I have M3s that go into some nylon standoffs, which are basically just used for like electronic enclosures typically. These standoffs are 30 millimeters because they're metric by M3 thread. I couldn't find the Imperial ones for 632 screws, so I just dealt with it and used the M3s. And those were fine. I bought like 100 of them for like less than 10 bucks, probably just a few bucks, I forget exactly. And I have an absolute buttload of them left over, so I'm probably going to keep using those because they worked great for holding on top armor. And then in the back I just added 1 more hole for the rear piece because I could already just like support it that way easily. The armor is a little bit weirdly higher than everything else. Previously I had it so that it was like 1.25 inches, and then the 30 millimeters is like maybe a millimeter or so gap, but it doesn't really matter, and I just consider the fact that these are nylon pieces to be free shock loading from the top if I were to get hit by a hammer bot, though I have yet to fight one. You can see these yellow boxes back there are speed controllers for the drive motors. Those are BotBits 8 amp ESCs. I have modeled in here a Lumineer 50 amp BL Heli 32-bit ESC for the weapon. I ended up actually using 35 amp BL Heli ESCs because the Lumineers, I blew up like 3 of them in testing, and I bought 4 of them, so that wasn't going super well. I thought that the 4th one worked, but I'll talk about that later in fight recap. I'm using a FingerTech power on switch. I don't like links. I saw, even at Norwalk just this time, somebody losing a fight because of link popping out more than twice, and these switches are like pretty bulletproof. I'm pushing over 100 amps through my weapon motor on startup, and they do not care, and they can handle well over 30 amps continuous for 3 minutes. The motors I'm using are Servo City Economy Planetary Gear Motors, 970 RPM. I used these on a 3-pound bot earlier. That was a control style bot, overhead saw robot actually, and they worked phenomenally for that with very similar wheels. I'm just using the FingerTech 2-inch diameter, wider, like 1/2-inch wide wheels, or whatever the width is of the wider wheels, 3/4 inch I think, and the FingerTech hubs with a 1/8-inch shaft, or sorry, a 4mm shaft I believe it is for these motors. Whatever it is you can find on Servo City's website. Have yet to have any problems with that. The first version of Division, in the Rumble, I had a wheel torn off, and in one other fight I think I had a hub like screwed up pretty badly. This competition with version 2 I didn't have a single tire even damaged. So really it's just a matter of keeping your front pointed towards the enemy, and then they won't get to your wheels. I don't like wheel guards because I'm afraid that they'll get bent into the wheels. In fact, in the Rumble, Mondo Bizarro, or in version 1, Mondo Bizarro hit one of these side pieces so badly it bent 270 degrees around into one of my tires. So that's one of the reasons that I added this extra support hole in the back here to keep it so that it could only bend like so far and wouldn't be able to easily interfere with the wheels spinning. One major change that I made to the overall layout from version 1 to version 2 is these motors used to line up perfectly with the center of gravity. Now they are 1/2 inch back, which means that the robot will always tilt forwards, and I can get under people a lot more easily that way. I basically modeled this all up, and I drew like a line from where the wheels contact the ground up to these tips of these forks, and I made it so that these front wedges are the exact right length to clip that line, so that even without having a hinged surface or whatever, it's actually pretty much riding the ground at the front, so I can actually get under people and push them around pretty easily. And then I actually found that these forks have a tendency to get stuck in the seam between the wall and the floor, so in practice they are drawn as a sharp point, and I had the CNC cut them out as a sharp point, but I ended up filing these back and making sure that they were rounded up a bit so that they kind of go like skis more than like a sharp point digging into the floor, so I can actually drive around. The wire guard is actually really instrumental in helping me drive around too, because it is positioned, let me get back out of a perspective view here. It is positioned such that it is about a couple millimeters above that imaginary line that contacts the ground, so I can still teeter-totter a little bit, which means that I don't get stuck on the floor. I don't get high-centered if like a 1 millimeter pellet of debris is like under this back edge here. But otherwise, it prevents the robot from being able to tilt back like it was able to in version 1 and just have the front like completely off the ground and have people getting under me all the time. And it just generally allows me to get more consistent traction as well by having a much smaller like overall ground clearance. And of course it protects the wires that I have to run underneath the robot, because I am kind of an idiot and designed my robot such that the weapon had to be as low as physically possible, and therefore there was no way to run wires anywhere else, or else risking them being cut in half by my own weapon disc. That was a trade-off that the first version of the robot solved with duct tape, and the second version solved with an actual functional piece of plastic that has had no problems so far. The battery that I'm using is a Turnigy Graphene Panther 500 mAh 3S. Everything's on 3S, and it is just barely able to fit in the robot in real life. It looks like it fits so snugly and nicely in the CAD model, but it's kind of a mess and has to be squeezed in there. But I made sure that the wedges are a bit steeper from version 2 to version 1, so that there's a little bit more length, so it's a lot less terrible. I think I need to move this point here back, though, for future versions, because it was kind of at a diagonal angle, because it was forced to be like over, this corner had to be like over here to clear that. So that was kind of an oversight on my part. I just didn't want it so far towards the back in case a vertical spinner was able to get in here and like maybe cut it in half or something, but realistically that will probably not happen without more catastrophic results from somebody getting that close to my rear armor. And what else is there? Oh yeah, the weapon motor I am using is a prop drive 2836 3000 kV, so it spins at 33,000 RPM or so with the battery fully charged, and I'm gearing it down about 3.3 to 1 with this gigantic pulley here based on the Fingertech belt calculator. And because Fingertech doesn't sell a toothed pulley big enough, and because I wanted to make sure there was some slip to deal with impacts better, I modeled my own smooth pulley with what should be the pitch diameter equivalent needed to get that 3.3 to 1 ratio. And I catted everything together with Fingertech's belt length calculator to figure out what a 70-tooth belt would stretch around, and then figured out the motor's mounting height based on that to get proper tensioning. That proved to be a little bit of a problem with this version, though, because the motor is pocketed in with its motor mounts, and the like cross mount that they come in the box with is really crappy soft aluminum and very poorly toleranced, so those would get bent with just me trying to screw the screws in. And I know it looks like these fit fine, but in practice, even with socket heads instead of button heads, the heads like don't clear at all, and it's pretty much impossible to screw them in without working at it with, especially these bottom two. You have to like turn like 30 degrees at a time with a hex wrench, and it's just a mess. So I'm probably going to change to a motor that's more powerful torque-wise and move it even higher. I moved it higher from the first version to the second version. I'm probably going to have to move it even higher for the third version just because I can't access those screws any other way. So yeah, with that I will talk about more issues as they come up during the fights, but I've already been talking about this for 20 minutes, so let's get to the fights.
So we've got Foiled Again.
Alright, this was somewhat of a rematch for me actually, because I fought Foiled Again in the last Norwalk Havoc event with version 1 of Division, and I beat him pretty handily then before my weapon belt flew off. This time things went pretty differently. The start was about the same. I was kind of just launching him around, and my weapon didn't stop at first, which was great. But I was having trouble driving because I wasn't used to the spot. It was the first time I was driving in a fight. I was kind of throttling the weapon up and down and like getting used to how hard it is to turn with this disc, which I had never used in version 1. And you can see my wheels just lift straight off the ground with gyro forces when I have the weapon going up to speed. So I have it at like maybe half speed for most of these hits, honestly. Here you can see I tilted back a little bit too far and just launched myself halfway across the arena in a way very reminiscent of the lightweight version of Deep 6. Here I was like, oh crap, he's spinning up, better take care of him. I'm just trying to get out his wheels here. You can see a couple times where I'm just like waiting while he's like turning and trying to get to the right timing, so I'm just hitting a wheel because there's like, kind of no point in hitting against his weapon. And now here, my weapon ESC gave out. I honestly don't really know why, maybe because I was throwing the weapon up and down so much, but also I'm just using these under-spec 35 amp ESCs on a motor that's meant to draw up to 55 amps, so that was kind of sad. But I knew I basically had this in the bag at this point. Until this. So here, this is what I was talking about with those forks. I got stuck under the wall. This is really, really embarrassing. And I thought, oh my god, if I lose this way, this would be the most pathetic thing ever. And I got freed slightly here, and then I was like trying to wiggle myself free and accidentally plant myself straight back in the wall because I'm an idiot. That wasn't Foiled's doing, that was me. So now I think Alex was like, well, if I'm going to get this win, I may as well just get the win, and he tries pushing me in further, I think. I'm not sure if that was intentional. He honestly is probably trying to free me here, but he only has one drive size, so there's only so much he can do.
Oh my god, that's so cool.
So as I'm slowly being counted out, I notice my robot is just slightly wiggling, and then at the last minute here, I'm able to get free. And now I'm just like, god
Well, we
damn it,
didn't end
I
the
better
match
finish
yet.
this fight without coming anywhere
think it's
close to getting
over.
stuck in a wall again. I only have 45 more seconds to push him around or whatever, but like, he
But
has no weapon. He has one drive side. I have both drive sides and no weapon too.
This
So
is not
this is
very
now going to
exciting.
be super boring. Showing match time.
You really... Wow.
It was fun for the first half of the fight, though.
All right. 20 seconds remain here.
You can see here, despite him having
And
probably
it's
a lot more
match.
drive power than me, because I believe he's using the premium Servo City motors,
Yeah.
and I think 4S. For whatever reason, I'm still able to push him
All
around.
right.
So those economy gear motors really are quite good.
4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we are going to give this one to Division.
So thankfully, I eked out a win there.
Congratulations.
Now there's the replay. I might skip over this. Let's just look at some of
And
the
let's take a
actual
look at that
hits, because you can
replay.
get a bit of better angle here. So here I spin up to like full speed. That first hit is probably
Boom.
at full speed
Out
on
of
the
the gate.
weapon.
Big
He just
shot.
gets launched. And then here, I just need a little bit
This
of
is
bite
amazing. Foiled
on the
again, it's
wheel,
repeated so
and then
many
he's
times, but
up
Division's ability to
and
literally
over.
rip apart the
And then
3D
I
parts,
get more bite on the
3D
3D
parts
printed
foiled again
parts.
is something
And you can
we
see
have not
this
seen
yellow
before.
that's visible through there. He
Pretty
told me
incredible.
that this is... So Alex Crace, the builder of this robot, he works for Mark Forged. So this robot's entirely 3D printed in carbon fiber, chopped carbon fiber impregnated nylon with
Just brutal.
continuous Kevlar fiber reinforcement. So that yellow that you're seeing is actually Kevlar, which is essentially a tougher version of fiberglass and slightly weaker version of carbon fiber strands. But I'm able to choose straight through it, like it's not even there, as long as the weapon keeps working. You can also see I do some nice sexy backflips here. And I've got some slow-mo video that I took on a cheap knockoff GoPro, so I can show those hits at 1/4 speed. You can see just how much energy is being tossed around here. So that hit was maybe at like 40% speed, if that. I apologize for the audio being so awful because I have the camera suction cupped to the arena wall, so it just picks up all these low frequency vibrations from the walls. And here, yeah, very Deep Six-like in that launch across the entire arena. And then I do like a 720 somehow and then end up perfectly fine on my wheels, though that was basically pure luck there. A couple more weaker hits here, nothing really that impressive. And then my ESC cuts out randomly, so I don't really know why. So,
Underway.
when I
15
found out I was
seconds,
fighting
counting
Silent
down on the
Spring,
clock.
Jameson Go, I was like, well, this is a death sentence.
Gonna be a
I'm
big
super
match.
screwed. I switched to my bar
Alright,
weapon
5,
here
4,
in hopes that
3,
I would
2,
get knocked into a position I
1.
couldn't
Fight,
self-right from
robots,
quickly and
fight.
die. But I was really hoping I could
No.
at least get a good hit
And
in.
Division doesn't even
Unfortunately,
spin up. This is not a
after
good
my
sign.
ESC died, I swapped it in for a 50 amp rated one that I had been testing with before. But actually, like I said, I blew up 3 of those. It turns out this 4th one had actually failed already before I even put it in the robot. So this was basically
Whoa.
pointless. I was like, shoot, I better make this at least good for the spectators, and decided to drive
Alright,
at him
well,
despite
that
my
was
weapon not
fast.
working. Jameson was super
And with
nice
that,
after this
we'll go
match,
to
and
the
he was
replay
literally like,
and
hey, I
break
want to
for
make sure
lunch.
that you're still going after this, so I appreciate that. He's a great guy, and an extremely talented bot builder, so I do not fault him in any way for taking my robot apart.
Alright,
And
so as we can
again, it
see
didn't cause
here,
any damage to the electronics. He just ripped off that front wedge, and I got knocked on my back, and that was it.
Division just wasn't able to get its weapon going. This is why you got to test your robot.
I did
Silent
test my
Spring
robot
ripped the front
many
Division off
times,
right
and
there.
unfortunately it was because of
And
that
killed
that it failed in this case.
And that was it.
One thing that I'm doing that's really interesting with the 3D prints that I've seen very few people do, and I think people should do more of in combat robotics, is threading directly into the plastic. A lot of people use threaded inserts. I use threaded inserts a lot in version 1 of the robot, but I also tried just not using them because of CNC Kitchen having an awesome YouTube video where he actually compared the strength of all the different threading methods. And he showed that the difference between threaded inserts and threading directly into parts is most significant in torque out, and much less significant in like sideways like ripping, which is how most of these would be loaded. Pulling in the direction of the threads like up is a bit weaker too, but not by as much as you'd think. So fighting a horizontal spinner, silent spring, this got ripped off, and then all the plastic that was around the perimeters that I had printed where the threads were actually engaged ripped completely off. So the 3D printed plastic parts that weren't reinforced by screw threads failed. Everywhere that was reinforced by screw threads was perfectly fine. So I am very confident that threaded inserts are an unnecessary waste of weight that could be used better elsewhere. So this was my next fight with Death Adder. I'm not sure why you said it. I just ripped holes in the belt again because I had my Silent Spring fight in between these, but yeah, this was a fight I wasn't looking forward to so much.
Death Adder's got to make his way over to a corner with a camera.
You'll see why in a second.
You can do it. I know the arena floor is challenged. All right, Death Adder, piloted by a 9-year-old combat robot competitor. And
so
Division,
yeah,
winner of most
I didn't really want to kill a 9-year-old's robot, but I also had talked with him and his dad and explained all about how I did the design for my robot and how I used 3D printing and CNC to make it so that they can come back better with their next robot. And at this point, I'm pretty sure that he was aware that if he were to win this fight, it would be because I very, very clearly just threw the fight. So, yeah, I just went at him at like 30 or 40% speed, hoping not to completely destroy the robot so that he could continue in a rumble later. And I tried to disable him in the least destructive manner that I could with such a destructive weapon, which was to flip him over. Unfortunately, there was no way to avoid ripping the weapon off, but it actually came off with the top half of the brushless motor it was coupled to, so I think it was probably perfectly repairable afterwards.
Was destroyed. Death Adder, can you show motion? Oh, that's a tap.
Yeah, the kid's super nice, and I felt bad after this, but I didn't really want to get knocked out by losing to a 1-pound Viper kit.
Alright, we have got to watch that replay, because that was insane.
Yeah, this fight was pretty much one hit.
So, Death Adder coming
he just
out,
gets launched.
gentle, and Division says, hello, goodbye.
That was really it. Okay, so this was my fourth fight with BDE.
In the other corner, we have Division.
So I was talking with the builder of BDE a bit before this fight, and he has a gigantic motor powering his spinner. I have a gigantic spinner coupled to a reasonably sized motor. This was going to be interesting, and it was pretty much as one might expect over in one hit. I went full speed, and then BAM! So, what's not so apparent from this is I didn't actually hit his wheel or motor, and in fact they were unscathed. What happened was I hit his blade so hard that not only did I bend the blade, it actually shattered some of the magnets off of his motor because the motor flexed. The blade was permanently bent, and the inertia from his chassis being launched was such that he had glued a portion of the side back together after it had broken in a previous fight, and that glue joint came loose, and just the inertia of that motor itself caused it to rip out of the chassis and sever the wires. Unfortunately,
Division is
I got
no,
stuck doing
wow,
the thing
yeah.
after this, and Brett
All
did
right,
not do
now,
the best thing to try and
Brett,
free
if
me.
Brett can do it, then it counts.
So sadly, with
Brett.
my weapon unable to restart,
Brett.
I was stuck, and I was just counted out like this.
This is Division's weak spot. Once he falls over,
So
he's
that
done.
was a really unfortunate end to a fight that I really wish I had won if it had been called as a double KO. But unfortunately, he could still
BDE.
drive on one side,
Oh.
so he won the fight, I guess rightfully, if you will
Brett.
consider the fact that I was immobilized and he was not.
BDE, it's your call. Do you want us to flip Division upright just to see what would happen? No. All right. Then we call the match for BDE. All right. Let's take a look at that replay. I'm not even sure what angle to take it from. This angle? Oh, yeah, here we go.
Yeah, so I get launched straight into the wall, and then unfortunately I maybe could have done some fancy driving with that one wheel. I had contact with the ground, but I didn't think to do so at the time. So I'm going to just end with this fight at the end here, where I am basically just doing a grudge match against Ghost. This is Alex Trace's second robot, which is a quantum-inspired Crusher bot. Alex is on BattleBots Team Valkyrie, so we recently got to see a fight between Quantum and Valkyrie, and that inspired him to basically build a 3-pound version of Quantum, since he already had the 3-pound version of Valkyrie and foiled again. So yeah, all in all, I'd say the event was a marginal success. There's a bunch of changes I still want to make. I need to make it so I can self-right with the weapon. I need to make it so that I can more reliably get all of the torque that I need from the weapon motor to the actual weapon. So I'm probably going to try and change belting again, or change the pulleys again. I'm most likely going to just try and get a round belt to work as an O-ring instead of having to fuse them together, or I will try using a toothed pulley to drive the weapon and hope that the shock loading doesn't rip the teeth off. But either way, I'm sure that I will be able to iterate upon this in the future, and hopefully I'll have more success then. My next plans are to go to Franklin Institute event, which will be this coming weekend, and I will almost certainly have another fight recap video in the next 2 weeks about that. And following that, I'm planning to go to Sword in November, Sword Fall, which is in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. After that, I will definitely be going to Motorama whenever that is announced. Special thanks to the event organizers of Norwalk Havoc. They run this event that is free admission for spectators, free admission for builders, and they do so through collecting the ad revenue from the videos that they get when they are streaming on YouTube and Twitch. So I'm probably going to provide the links in the description below. You should definitely check them out, like and subscribe their video, like and subscribe this channel, and I will have follow-up very soon from Franklin. And I will also most likely be doing something of a design stream or a design video where I talk about plans that I have for a future 12 or 30 pound bot that I'd like to bring to Motorama. So yeah, look forward to those videos, and feel free to comment if there's anything that I made a mistake about, or there's any particular advice that you might have about how to fix my weapon situation. I'd be interested to hear what the combat robot community has to say. And also, if you just are a spectator or happen to be in the area for one of the competitions that I mentioned, I strongly recommend that you go and attend a live event, because next to building a robot yourself, the best way to get into robot combat is to see what kinds of forces are involved when you're seeing these fights in person. It's really difficult to get a good sense of just how much power these robots have when you're just watching a video on YouTube. So I strongly recommend going out, seeing the fights. It's a lot of fun, and everyone is always super friendly in the community and willing to help you out if you're trying to get started.